Hello there, welcome to our review session on the OC test sample paper, specifically the reading comprehension paper. You can see just from looking at this briefing that there are 25 questions in this particular test, and there are 30 minutes in which to attempt this. The one thing I want to just quickly highlight before we go straight into the questions is this phrase over here. It says, you can use the question paper for notes, but no extra paper is allowed. This particular phrase over here. That's very important because that implies that we're allowed to write as much as we like on this question booklet itself. And as we go through the questions, I'll also explain what kinds of things you want to take note of as you're reading the passage for the first time. So starting from the first text, now I'm just going to write some notes in the margins. Just like when you read a book, it has an index which actually tells you what the contents of the book are and what kinds of things you can expect to read within the book. We're doing something very similar, and that's because this is such a long piece, right? This is a very long extract from a story. And because there's so many different things that are happening here, it's best to just keep track as we're reading. So from the first paragraph, as I read through it, I recognize that it's about, girls who are afraid to gather firewood by themselves because the village was surrounded by a forest where anything might hide. So here I would literally just write fear, because this paragraph is talking about the things that, the girls may be fearful of. If you think more about exactly what things they're likely to be afraid of, over here, it talks about animals, right? It mentions the elephants, it mentions the buffalo, and even though they're not, specific things that this particular girl may be scared of, I would just write down animals, so I have something to go back and check on in case any questions are related to that. Similarly, I also have this paragraph here where it talks about how her worry is leopards. She worries about leopards. So I would just write leopards here. I would underline this part which talks about, her mother who had very tragically been killed by a leopard. So these kinds of things just help me keep track of what each paragraph is talking about to make it much quicker and easier for me to go back to once I have a look through the questions. Likewise, this paragraph over here up ahead, it talks about a broad path from the village to the stream, right? A stream is like a small river. So here I would just write stream or even river if you needed further clarification. So that's pretty much the process I would go through as I'm reading it. I might even underline some other key words or key phrases as I'm going through it. So something like, because she couldn't swim, that might come in useful. So if it asks something about, what kinds of things she's fearful of, or, what causes her panic and why she's panicked as she's crossing the river, those are some clues that may help out. Another thing would be something like, the aunt who was waiting for her firewood. So before it mentioned that she had a very compelling reason to go, despite her fears. And over here, it seems like this is one of those compelling reasons. Of course, as we read on, we'll find out further. Another thing may be this phrase here when it says dusk was when the leopards came out to hunt. So that also, indicates that she needs to come back within a certain time frame because she's scared of the leopards. As I read further, I realize that she has come across an old abandoned village. So that's something I would write just over here. This section over here talks about how she's gathering firewood. So just keeping a note of what kinds of things we're reading as we're going through the text will make it much faster when you're doing the questions. Now, I have a lot of students who ask me, doesn't it take time when I'm underlining stuff and writing things over in the margins and things like that? And while that's true, it does take a little bit more time to actually write these things in the margins. It ultimately saves you time because you know exactly which part of the text to go back to whenever you read a particular question. Going further into the text, with this second page here, just to show you guys what kinds of things, again, I would write very briefly. Well, as she's looking further at this collection of her treasures, the things that she holds very close to her, I noticed that, one thing here is the magazine. So I would definitely take note of that. And this magazine keeps coming up. So here I would actually just write magazine, because that seems to be a very important part of this text. And then what is exactly on the magazine cover that captures her attention? So I would write magazine cover, the lady or beautiful woman who was on the cover of the magazine, as well as the little girl who is mentioned over here, right? Underline that section over there. The white bread and yellow margarine. All of these different elements just feed into what the concept of this entire paragraph or this entire section is about. Of course, the fact that the lady also reminds her of her mother is something to note. this section over here, which talks about how she is pretending to have tea, right? Or we'll just write pretend tea. And then as she keeps progressing through her day, eventually she finds out that it's dusk time. So all this time has gone by, and now she needs to rush back home as quick as she can. This is how I would annotate the piece as I read through it, and that will make things much quicker as we go through the questions. So for example, question 1, when the writer mentions elephants and buffaloes, as soon as I read that, since I've already taken note of the fact that the first paragraph talks about animals, I would go straight back to there. The correct answer for this question was A. They could possibly be a threat to Namo, the main character. This is the best answer because even though at the beginning it says that she's not all that concerned about the elephants and buffaloes, she's much more concerned about the leopards, it still doesn't say that she doesn't care about them or she doesn't fear about them at all, right? It says that she didn't expect to meet the elephants. She wasn't likely to run into a buffalo, but these are things that could still happen. And in fact, it did happen to someone else just a few months ago. So even though it's not the biggest threat, it is still something that she should be concerned about. It could possibly be a threat, which is why the answer was A. Question 2. When she crosses the stream, Namo is most worried by which of the following? So again, I was lucky enough to write stream or river as I was reading through it the first time around. So when I go back to that particular section and read through it again, the best answer I can see would be C, the deep water, right? The reason she's worried by the deep water is because, as it mentioned before, she couldn't swim, right? And in fact, when she saw that it was shallow, so if I go back to that section over there, over here, it says she always experienced a moment of panic in the middle because she couldn't swim. And it also mentions that there was an area of yellow sand where she could see the bottom clearly. So these are things that make her feel a little bit more aware of the depth of the water because she's concerned about it since she couldn't swim. Going back to the questions, so if I look at question 3, one advantage of the deserted village for Namo is that, so an advantage of the deserted village. So on cue, I go back to this section, which was talking about this abandoned village itself, which I had marked right here, right? And the giveaway for this question is right over here. So she says that was the good thing about this place, is that the wood was easy to find. So even though the abandoned village was quite far away from where she lived, the good thing about it is that the firewood, which is what she was after, is quite easy to find. So that's why the correct answer to this question was D. Question number 4, the word reverently. Now, whenever you see something like this, it's just asking for the meaning of a word. Make sure you actually go back to the passage and look at how the word was used, because that context can sometimes change the meaning that they're looking for in the correct answer. But in general, if you do something reverently, it means you do it with great care and great respect, which is why the best answer for question 4 is B. So how precious the articles are. And keep in mind, it's not just a quick definition. It says the word reverently tells us, right? So it's not just the meaning of the word, it's what does this word imply in the way that it's being used. The reason the best answer for question 4 was B is because she takes the pieces of paper very, very carefully and very in a very respectful way. So you might think that, hang on, does that mean that Namo's careful the way she handles the possessions of others? Well, the reason that it's not C and the reason that the answer is actually B is 2 things. Number 1 is it's possessions of others. This is not someone else's property. This is her own property. It's things that belong to her. So that's one reason it's not C. And the other thing is the fact that she's holding it so carefully is because the things are so precious to her. Remember that she ripped out one of these pages of the magazine without her aunt knowing and without her aunt seeing, and to this day no one knows who did it and someone else got blamed for it. So that's because these articles are very precious to her. That's the reason that B is the better answer. Question 5. Okay, this is another one that may have 2 similar or close answers, and we need to figure out which one's the best answer. So when the writer tells us about how magazines are used in Namo's village, we learn that, right? So how the magazines are used. I think there was a part before where I had just written books or magazines. That basically talks about how people saw that in her own village, and in that paragraph you should have underlined the word village as well. Just quickly go back to that so we can have a refresher. Okay, it is right here. It's a bit harder here because the markings aren't permanent, but this is the part that talks about how the book is treated within her village, specifically this area over here. So it says books were unheard of in Namo's village, but very occasionally a magazine found its way in there. Only two men in the village could read, and they retold the stories to everyone's enjoyment. So that straight away tells you that everyone in the village actually does enjoy the contents of the magazine. They enjoy reading it, and they also enjoy looking through the pictures. So they enjoy both parts of this magazine. With that in mind, if I go through the answer choices for question 5, the first one is most people are only interested in the pictures, right? That's not true, because we found out that the two men could read it and everyone else still continued to enjoy the way that these two men would read out the contents of the magazine. That's why A is not the correct answer. Tempting, but not quite correct. We learned that they are a window to the world outside the village. This is a much better answer. It's the correct answer for question 5, because the villagers basically get to see how things are outside the village, right? They get to see things like gardens and cars. They get to see pictures of clothes and houses. These are the things that they may not have within this village, which is why it's a window to the world outside the village itself. Most people laugh at the stories they contain, and they are more valued as fuel than as reading matter. These are not quite true. Even though the magazines are used as fuel, to light fires, that's only if the magazines fall apart. So after they've read it and after they've enjoyed it, when it doesn't have any more use, then it's as a last resort, they kind of burn it or use it as fuel, right? So that's why neither of these are correct either. So make sure that you go through this process of eliminating the answer choices. Some of them will seem like they're very close and similar together, but you need to think about what the best answer is. So we spoke about why the villagers like the magazine. This question 6 is about why Nama was attracted to the magazine photograph. And that's because of a couple of things. Firstly, when she sees it, she's reminded of her mother. So you might think that this could be an answer, option A. But then if you read further, you'll see that she actually enjoys the way that that magazine basically depicts a nice relationship between that mother and daughter, or between the lady and the young girl, right? It shows how they were having, bread and yellow margarine together. There's another section I want to just draw to your attention very quickly. If we go back there, it says, the woman smiled at her in the kindest way. Right? And Nama knew that the bread and margarine were meant for the little girl. So this is talking about a very kind and loving relationship between the lady and the girl. And that is why the best answer for this question, go down, the best answer for question number 6 is C, right? It shows a loving relationship. So even though it has a picture of someone that looks like the mother, or even if the child does look like her, the best answer is that it actually shows a nice relationship between the lady and the girl. Moving on to the next poem, Observing the Mute Cat. So, okay, I'm not going to go through that same exercise where I annotate all the different paragraphs and what they're talking about, but as same concept applies. So as you read through, make sure you just underline or highlight certain words which can draw your attention to what things to look out for as you go through the questions. Not that important because this is a poem and not a particularly long poem in that sense, but it still helps to underline certain things just as memory hooks. Going through the questions, question 7, the title of the poem. Okay, so the title of this poem is Observing the Mute Cat. All right, there's 2 words there, right? Observing and mute, which give away the answer to this question. If you observe something, what does that mean? Observing means to look at something, right? The mute cat. Now, we call something that cannot talk or make noises mute, just like when you mute the TV, right? The mute button on your remote. So observing, which is seeing, the mute cat, because this poem is all about looking at this cat, looking at all the different things that it does and how it behaves, and also basically just looking at the cat itself, which is the act of observing. Now the cat itself, it doesn't make noises. The poem doesn't really talk too much about the noises the cat makes by itself. Of course, it does talk about how it rattles the doors and things like that, but ultimately the cat itself doesn't speak or make many noises. So we are watching a cat that doesn't make many noises. What kinds of language is this? What are those words? They're sensory words, right? They talk about senses, and that's why the best answer is C. It's reflected in the senses that are described, and those senses are what we see the cat doing. So it uses words like, we can see the cat lapping up the clear water. We can see his pile being, perfect. We can see how he opens his mouth, how he runs across the lawn. All of these things that we see, that all contributes to this concept of observing the cat. Question 8, what do we learn about the person in the poem? Well, most of the poem is actually about the cat itself. Not much is about the person. So when I go back and I find words that relate to this person, maybe I can see walk on his man, his human friend. Those seem to be the most important things that talk about the cat. Sorry, the person themselves. The best giveaway for this question is actually this paragraph here. So it says he politely hates to be picked up. His human friend never does it. Right? Or even this section over here. He finds a voice in the fly screen, so he's rattling the fly screen, and when that happens, he gets let in. Right? He gets let in. So that tells you that the persona, right, the person in the poem, basically respects the wishes of the cat. If the cat doesn't want to be picked up, then he won't be picked up. If the cat wants to come inside, and you get that hint by rattling the door, then he will let the cat inside. That's why the answer to 8 was B. Question 9, the cat makes a sound using which of the following? Now, that was actually something that we just looked at just then. So we found that the cat actually rattled the fly screen. So he would, shake the fly screen, and that would tell the owner to let him in. So that's why the best answer for this one is D. He finds a voice in the fly screen. Question 10. What does the cat take away? All right, this is one of those questions that it's tricky because you have to read very, very closely and carefully and pay a lot of detail and attention to each point. But as you read through it, you find out towards the very end, it says he swallows his scent and discreet with his few stained birds. He's very careful and ginger with his few stained birds that he carries them off, right? So he basically carries off these birds, right? He takes them away. And that's why the answer to question 10 is A, he takes away the birds. Question 11, the cat acts independently when he does what? Okay, again, the best way of doing these kinds of questions is to go through each of the options and think about whether the cat is acting independently or dependently. So independently is when you don't rely on anyone else and you do something by yourself. Dependent is when you need someone else to do something for you. So rejects the food that he is provided. Okay, I don't recall the cat actually rejecting food at all. In fact, if we go back to the part where it talks about his food, it says he can fish food pellets out of the dispenser. So he can take the food himself, but instead he waits. He waits because he prefers to be served. Now, if you're being served by someone else, you're not independent. You're not doing things by yourself. It means you want them to do it for you. You're actually dependent. So that's why that is not the answer to this question. Going through the other choices. The cat acts independently when he rejects the food provided. No, he's actually dependent, right? He wants someone else to give him the food. He wants to be served. So it's not that. Okay. When he enters the house, now if you remember from before, he actually rattles the cage or rattles the fly screen until the person lets him in. That's also pretty dependent. So it's not B either. Looking between C and D. Now, if I go back to the part where it talks about the rain, it basically says, scrolling back up, this is the part where it talks about rain. It says, his pile being perfect ignores the misting rain. Now, pile is basically like the soft parts of, I guess, carpet, which sticks out. In this case, it just means his fur. So it's saying that his fur is absolutely perfect and it just ignores the misting rain. So he completely ignores the rain. He doesn't really care about it at all, right? He's not dependent or independent. He doesn't look for shelter from the rain. He just completely ignores it. So the only time he actually acts independently, when he acts by himself, is when he accesses drinking water, right? It says in the very first paragraph that he, even though he has clean water inside the house, he prefers to lap up the clay water, right? He drinks the muddy, dirty water. That's why C is the best answer for this question. Moving on to the next text. So they have included closed passages in the OC test as well, pretty much following suit from the selective test, as well as this additional text type, comparative texts or thematic reading. We'll very briefly go through the strategies for this, but yes, the main aim of this video is actually just to go through the questions themselves. In terms of strategies that may be useful for these, generally we tell students to basically just think about obviously all of these questions are testing the concept of context, right? Context is just understanding, what happens around the sentence. So if we have a sentence over here that's missing, then how is it related to the sentences that come before and after, right? And you can have different relationships. It could be like a direct link. So, you have something that's like an event A, which leads to something B, and, in turn leads to something C, except if they've scratched this out, then you need to think about, okay, what happens in between? What is a link between A and C? That's one type of relationship. You can have another type of relationship which talks about, basically explaining. So that just goes directly from A to B, right? Someone might say, I really, oops, wrote that out, sorry. Someone might say, I really like ice cream. And then after that, you might expect an explanation, right? So why do you really like ice cream? Yeah, so that's another kind of relationship. And without going into too much depth, the main skill here is understanding, what are the relationships you can have between sentences. If we're going purely off the questions and sentences themselves, let's understand why each answer is, firstly, how to do it, and then secondly, why it's correct. So I can see just from looking at the very first paragraph, sorry about the phone going off. So looking at the very first paragraph, now you are welcome to read this because it can also often give you some sort of indication of what the entire text is about. So definitely do read that, but I'm going to skip it for today because there's no missing sentence there. So jumping straight into the next paragraph. This example is the closest we have to so far to musical instrument use, right? So this first sentence is talking about how similar these cockatoos are to the way that humans use musical instruments. A palm cockatoo drumming performance starts with instrument fashioning, right? Instrument fashioning is just a fancy word for making, right? Fashioning is to make something, making the instrument itself, right? So this is kind of your linking sentence, right? So you have your A, and that's all about making the instrument. You have your C, which is talking about how sometimes you have, or often you have, a female is watching. So when the female is watching, the male will ostentatiously, it just means he will, like, in a very visible and obvious way, he will take a big, hefty stick off the tree, and he will trim it to the length of a pencil. So he will take a big, heavy stick, and he'll trim at it, right? He'll trim it down and make it just the length of a pencil, and he will do this while the female is watching. What do we call that kind of behavior? We call it showing off. We call it showing off. So we need to think about, okay, the first, the sentence A was talking about how the male cockatoo makes the instrument. Option C is talking about how he's showing off as he's making the instrument. So we need to go through the individual sentences and find what that missing link B is. So scrolling down through the answer choices there, if I look through each of those sentences, and I've actually read through all of them, but the one thing that should stick out to you straight away is option number D over here. This is an opportunity to show off beak strength, right? The male is basically just showing off to the female cockatoo by taking this hefty stick and trimming it down, and that's why that's the best answer for this question. So straight away, I know that the answer there is D, and I got that so quickly just by understanding that context, trying to understand what this sentence is about, this sentence is about, trying to use some of those key words like, as the female is watching, ostentatiously, which means to, show off or to, do something very obviously. Those kinds of clues can help you get the answer much quicker. Next question, question 13. Holding the stick. Holding the stick, or occasionally a hard seed pod with his left foot, parrots are typically left-footed, the male taps a beat on his tree perch. Keyword there is the fact that he is tapping a beat, right? So he's basically drumming. Missing sentence. Spreading his wings, he pirouettes and bobs his head deeply, like an expressive pianist uncovering his red cheek patches, the only spots of color on his otherwise black body. Sure, it seems like he's showing off here, but really what he's doing is he's just dancing, right? The cockatoo is bobbing, he's spreading his wings, he's pirouetting like a ballet dancer, and he's dancing, right? So what would be the missing link between drumming and dancing? It would pretty much be, what's he doing as he's drumming and dancing, right? What is the key link there? What's the key theme or common thing between them? Is that they're both an example of a performance, right? He's basically performing. All right, so I need to find one of those answer options there, which links this concept of performing and also links this other concept of music. So which of those sentences talks about the way that these cockatoos deliver music and perform? So going through my sentences, which one here talks about some example of the performance and show that he's putting on, right? So some more details about this dancing or drumming or music that he's doing. Researchers found palm cockatoos a difficult subject, not this one. This suggested that they actually use their drumming with a complex array of calls and wing flapping to attract female birds. Now, that's actually not something that's really relevant to this paragraph. It might have been in the first one, but this one's not talking about attracting females or anything like that, so it's not here. This one's just talking about performing in general. Birds are considered vulnerable, not really. Opportunity, we've already used this one. Birds sway together and gently preen each other's feathers. Well, this paragraph only talks about one bird, so it wouldn't be that one because this one talks about two birds. That's not that one. And then between these two options, the option F is about occasionally he mixes in a whistle or other sounds from an impressive repertoire around 20 syllables. Is that talking about this concept of drumming, performing, making music? Yeah, it definitely relates to the concept of music. He's making, unique noises. That seems like it could be a good answer. Of course, I should eliminate the other one as well. Individual males differed slightly in percussive styles. So it talks about the palm cockatoo, right? And it's not really comparing, different males. If it had said something like, we have this many palm cockatoos, or all these different ways that male cockatoos perform, then sure, you might be able to compare them. But the relationship with this sentence is it's more of a link, the link that I was talking about before, and it's less about contrast or comparison, right? And that's what this one here is doing. It's comparing and contrasting. So that's why G is actually not that great of an answer. F is the best answer. Okay, going well. As we move on to the next paragraph, question number 14. Over 7 years, Dr. Heinzson and his collaborators collected audio and video recordings of 18 male palm cockatoos exhibiting such behaviors in Australia's Cape York Peninsula. Well, there's a few different things going on here. The first thing is you have this researcher, you have his fellow researchers, they're collecting recordings of male palm cockatoos, their behaviors, and it's in this specific place here. So there is a lot going on in this one sentence alone, right? Sometimes that happens. Sometimes they put in so much information in one sentence that it's very difficult for you to think about what the next sentence might be. Of course, we can try and read a little bit further to see if there's anything common. Though palm cockatoos also live in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, they have been observed drumming only in Cape York Peninsula, which suggests the habit is cultural. So this is talking about how there are different behaviors between cockatoos in different areas, right? So the thing that links it is this concept of area and region and where they are. Going through the options, now remember there was lots of different things going on here. It could be about the researchers, it could be about male palm cockatoos, or it could be about areas, but the thing that kind of links them are those three things. So I'm just gonna write it up here so that you guys can keep track of what things we are thinking along the lines of, or should be thinking along the lines of. Talking about researchers, we are talking about the area or the location, right? And we're also going to talk about the differences between individual male palm cockatoo, right? So there are three different things that are going on here, which may be useful. Going through the options, I need to see which ones I can either eliminate or confirm. The other thing I really want to mention right now is every time you have used an option already, right, make sure you mark it or indicate it so that you know which ones have already been done. That helps you, narrow it down to the, the better choices, right? If you've used an option, you can't use it again. So the ones that we've already used so far is, I think we used D, the one about showing off. We have used F, right? And we've only used those two so far. Now, remember, we spoke about researchers. It says the researchers found palm cockatoos a difficult subject to study. Now, even though we did talk about researchers in the sentence we were looking at before, there was nothing about them being difficult to study or them being shy. In fact, they actually managed to collect video and audio recordings of 18 different, male palm cockatoos. So this is probably not the best fit for this question, right? Probably eliminate A for the time being, even though some parts of it seem like they were relevant. Then the next one. This suggested that they actually use their drumming with a complex array of calls to attract female birds. Again, this one is not relevant. None of the things that we spoke about before come up in this sentence, so it's not B. The birds here are considered vulnerable because of aluminium ore mining in the area. Well, at first you're thinking, what on earth does that have to do with any of what we read, right? It's talking about the birds being considered vulnerable, right? Which again was not really discussed because of aluminium ore mining. That also was not really discussed, but in this area, right, in this particular area. Now that's one of those links that we could have to work off. So it could be this answer, right? And then the other options, E and G. The birds sway together and gently preen each other's feathers, an act of pair bonding that helps them prepare for breeding. The paragraph in the sentence we were talking about was not talking about breeding at all. It was just talking about the, the habits of the male palm cockatoo. So it's not going to be E, right? And then individual males differed significantly in percussive styles. Now, this is also one that it could be the answer because it said that they studied 18 different male palm cockatoos. They were looking at the behaviors that they were exhibiting. right? And this one here does flow logically in that it's about individual males differing significantly in percussive styles. So while this one's talking about area, this one's talking about males and their different styles. Both of these have some sort of relationship, and right now I'm not able to decide which one would be the best answer. So that's okay. Sometimes you won't be exactly certain about what the best answer might be. Sometimes you need to think about a few different options and think about if there may be a better answer elsewhere. So for the time being, I'm just going to write C and G over here, right? I'm not sure which one is a better answer, but I'll keep that there for the time being in case one of them fits in perfectly as I read further on. Moving on to question 15. Moving on to question 15. Something that's missing. Then trekking through dense rainforest, they painstakingly searched for palm cockatoos hidden away, right? Palm cockatoos that are hidden away. They are searching painstakingly. These kinds of words imply that the palm cockatoos, they couldn't find them easily, right? They were hiding and they had to spend a lot of effort and time to actually find these palm cockatoos. So the option that works perfectly first time around, as soon as I look at it, would be A. The researchers found palm cockatoos a difficult subject because they are shy, right? So those are the keywords that give away that 15 is A. Then 16. So 16, if we look at what comes just before this blank over here, right, it says analyzing the drumming sequences, they found that the birds produced regular, predictable rhythms and they weren't random. Okay, well, that makes sense. So they were able to, perform like proper rehearsed, not rehearsed, sorry, just proper beats, right, predictable rhythms. And then after that, the sentence that immediately follows is one that the researchers named Ringo Starr, right? So one of the cockatoos that they named Ringo Starr, Ringo, of course, being the drummer for the Beatles, like to start with a rapid flourish, then settle into a consistent beat, occasionally going for as long as 14 minutes. Nearly 70% of the time, males drum with a female present. So essentially the gist of 16 is basically just saying that there are so many different rhythms that these male cockatoos had, but there was this one particular cockatoo who had this particular rhythm, right? So one cockatoo who had a special or a unique rhythm. When I look through the answer choices and see what I have left at this point, by my count, I think we have G, E, C, and B left, right? G and C were the ones that we were tossing up between, from before. Not that that matters too much because we still have to see which one fits perfectly in this way. And now, as I said, it's talking about one particular unique cockatoo who had a unique, drumming pattern after they've analyzed a whole bunch of different sequences, right? That implies that the best answer for this would be something that talked about how each cockatoo had a different percussive style, a different way of playing it, which is why they go on to elaborate and talk about one particular cockatoo as an example, right? That's why the best answer for this one is G. So it starts off talking about, all the different, sequences that the cockatoos, they were able to find with the cockatoos, that they had regular, predictable rhythms. Then individual males had different rhythms, right? They had different ways of performing. And one of them that they chose to focus on was Ringo Starr, right? So that just fits perfectly within this context, which is why G is the best answer. Because we worked out that this one here must be G, right? The previous one that we had for 14, even though it seems not that likely, was actually C, right? So question 14, the birds here are considered vulnerable because of aluminium ore mining in the area, right? Now go back and see how that actually works within the sentence and if it makes logical sense. So it says, exhibiting such behaviors in Australia's Cape York Peninsula, right? In Australia's Cape York Peninsula. Then the following sentence was, the birds here are considered vulnerable. And that ties in perfectly because when you see a sentence and it says the birds here are considered, then you need a sentence beforehand to tell you where here is. And in this case, it does tell you. It tells you that here refers to the Cape York Peninsula, which is why for question 14, C works perfectly, right? And now we've got all of those answer choices, all of those sentences filled out for each sentence. So for question 17, all that leaves us with to choose between is B and E, right? So only B and E are left over. Reading this, the paragraph, The researchers don't yet know whether females prefer certain rhythms over others, but if a male is delivering an effective performance, the female comes over and mirrors his movements. Okay, so this is talking about what they're doing together, right? So they don't know how the females interact with certain rhythms, but if the male is delivering an effective performance, something that's good, then the female comes over and mirrors his movements. They do a little dance together, right? Which of these two options, B and E, talks about the bonding or the dance that they may be doing together? The best answer is E, right? The birds sway together, they gently preen each other's feathers. It's an act of pair bonding. Pair bonding makes perfect sense given that the first, I was talking about the male's performance, the female coming over and mirroring his movements. They have a little bit of a dance together that gets them ready prepares for breeding. The best answer for 17 is definitely E, which means that B is the one that we did not use. Okay, that's the one that was not used in this entire text. Okay, so I know that was a big, long, and difficult one. It's complex because you may not have seen it before, but hopefully some of those strategies you'll come across in the next one term, which will help you be better prepared for those kinds of questions. But as I said, the key principle is understand how sentences are related to each other, firstly, and secondly, eliminate your options as you go along. And also sometimes you may not be able to pick the best answer between two close choices, and that's okay. You can put both of them down for the time being and see if they come up at a future point in time. And if they do, that makes your life much easier. Now, moving on to the extracts on the theme of the sea, the key to these kinds of texts, right, these thematic reading texts or these comparative texts, is understanding exactly what each extract is talking about and keeping track of it, right? Keeping note of what each extract is talking about. For example, extract A. This basically talks about how going for a swim in the ocean makes your problems shrink, right? And the persona is talking about his experiences when he goes out for a swim in the ocean. And as you read through this, you should be able to summarize it briefly in your head and also think about the key words that you associate with this paragraph. This is all about summarizing and associating certain buzzwords or keywords with the theme of the paragraph, hence thematic reading. So as I read through this, the first words that you think of is how this person finds, swimming in the ocean. Maybe he finds it relaxing, right? Maybe he finds it a form of de-stressing, right? So his stresses, his worries seem to shrink away. They seem to go away. At the same time, right? He also feels quite humbled every time he swims in the ocean. And that's because of what this other person told him. He said that he spoke to an expert about getting over a fear about what might be in the water. And he said it's actually a privilege, right? Because of how big the planet is and how vast it is, how vast the ocean is, and how all these creatures would be living there. And even though that's not something comforting for everyone, it is comforting for this person, right? So it's humbling. The person feels humbled because of how big the ocean is and because of how sometimes dangerous the ocean is, right? So these are all the words, themes, ideas that you would associate with extract A. And it's very important to take note of all those things. In fact, I wouldn't even read any of these questions until I go through the extracts properly first, because once you do this, once you have this clear understanding of what's in it, you should be very, very quick with the questions. It should be very easy to do the questions after that. Just to give you some idea, as soon as I finish extract A and I finish writing these things down, I'm going to go through the questions straight away. So I will just read down and put the correct, if I think A is the best fit for this particular question, I would put it down straight away. That you'll see as we progress will actually save you quite a lot of time as well. So which extract refers to a dangerous constituent of some seawater? Okay, constituent means something that makes up something else, right? Even though it does kind of talk about how the ocean is dangerous, that's not the same as seawater being dangerous, not the water itself. It's about the creatures within the water. And also the creatures aren't really constituents. They don't make up the water itself, right? They just live in there. So it's not this one. So 18, the answer is not A. Next one, 19, says that the power of the sea should not be underestimated. Is that really mentioned in this paragraph? Yeah, absolutely. It does talk about how the power of the sea should not be underestimated. In fact, it should be something that you should feel humbled by, right? The power of the sea, because of this paragraph over here, right? You need to know your limits. You need to be fully respectful of the ocean. You need to know when the water looks too rough and how it can be dangerous if you underestimate, if you don't really know exactly what it involves. So the answer to this one is A. I would write that in straight away. Question 20. Suggests that newcomers are not welcomed by veterans out on the water. Well, this paragraph doesn't talk about newcomers or veterans or experts on the ocean. Or, I mean, I know it mentions this expert, but he's not really talking about, he seems quite welcoming to, this person who's asking questions, this person who's starting open water swimming. So it wouldn't be 20, that is not related to A. The sea can be a rich food source, doesn't talk about food. Explains a positive effect that the sea can have on one's mental outlook. Well, we did say it was relaxing and de-stressing. He talks about how his problems seem to occupy less headspace, how his problems shrink. So this one is definitely A. Right? And the next one reveals that the writer was out of place in a seaside environment. No, he's not out of place here. Mentions some words of wisdom about the sea, which proved to be helpful to the writer. Yes, and that is mentioned over here when this expert first talks about, the ocean and the fear of what might be in it. And it also helps this person realize that he needs to know his limits. He needs to know when he should go to the beach and when he shouldn't go into the ocean, right? So this one does talk about that as well. So 24 is also A. Right. Now that I've got these three questions, and of course I know that 25 is not A, right? Specific jargon. Jargon means technical terms, right? Technical terms that are relevant to a specific, area or specific area. This is not talking about any, specific terminology or, highly specific language. So that one's not A. But just by filling these in, right? All I need to do is do the same thing for extract B. But I'll save myself a lot of time when I go through the questions after reading extract B, because I don't need to look at this question, and I don't need to look at that question, and I definitely don't need to look at this question either, right? I've already answered the correct, perfect answer for those questions. So I'm not looking through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm not looking through 8 different questions. I'm only looking through these ones over here, right? 5 questions out of 8. That saves time, right? So you should be trying to find strategies like this to not just save time, but also improve your accuracy. Going on to extract B. Okay, this one was pretty straightforward. It was just talking about the Black Sea and the fact that this Black Sea is made up of this deadly chemical, hydrogen sulfide, right? One of the deadliest substances in the world, makes up a lot of this Black Sea. And then it talks about how there is a certain line here, the 100 fathom line. Fathom, in case you're curious, not that they expect you to know it, it's just a unit of measurement that they use to measure like the depth of the ocean, right? So essentially this Black Sea is made up of so much of this hydrogen sulfide and that oxygen doesn't actually dissolve in this water, which means that if you had this sample of the Black Sea, you have 90% of it, right? 90% of its volume is sterile. So there's 90% has absolutely no life in it, right? This entire section here, right? But the section that's up near the top, right, is, where's the word I'm looking for? I've covered it up. Okay, it's over here. Boiled with life. The water boiled with life, right? That means it has a lot of life, a lot of abundance of living things in this tiny little space over here. You have things like salmon, you have huge sturgeon, and these beluga sturgeon can give us caviar, and it was so plentiful at one point in time, that basically just tells you that there's a lot of food here, right? So it's just talking more about the Black Sea, the deadly substance it contains, and how that means that most of it doesn't have any life, but the small 10% of it is absolutely teeming or brimming, full of life, right? Now, how does that help me out when I go through the questions? Well, the first one, question 18, refers to a dangerous constituent of some seawater. This one is definitely B. I'll just fill in the other ones that we put down for A, just to make it easy to visualize how many questions we're getting through. Okay. Now looking through the remaining questions, suggest that newcomers are not welcome. Nope, that's not what this is talking about. Suggest the sea can be a rich food source. Absolutely. Talks about salmon. It talks about beluga sturgeon and the caviar. Right, those are all food sources, and can be a rich food source. Of course, there are keywords there that also help you out. So it says that it is boiling with life, right? So there's so much life there. The caviar was so plentiful, right? All of those things imply that it's very rich. It's full of life. So this one's definitely B. And I don't believe that either of these other 2 options are B, right? This one's not about being out of place, and it doesn't talk about specific terms. So it's just those ones, right? And then all I need to do is read through my third extract, right? I don't even have to be concerned with extract D, because if I read through my third extract and find, some of these answers here are C, then whatever's left over must be D. So that's another time-saving strategy. So if we quickly get down to extract C, just so you guys know how to summarize it. Well, this one, as you read through it, it's talking about this book that this person's reading, Surf's Up, right? How she's memorizing surfing vocabulary. What do we call vocabulary or words that are specific to a particular area, we call it jargon. So this is the giveaway for that question from before, the one about jargon, right? You can't learn to surf from a book, but it will make some things easier, like talking to other surfers, right? It also makes you less likely to incur the wrath of surfers, right? So wrath basically means a few pronunciations of wrath there. So it's wrath, wrath if you're American, I guess, but wrath just means extreme anger, right? So how can you, it says if you know the correct words, then you're less likely to get all these surfers angry at you, right? The surfers will not be angry with you if you know their words. From my limited experience, surfers don't really have wrath. They don't really get angry at you unless you drop in on them during a really good wave, right? So unless you cut them off, right, they're not really going to get angry at you. But if you cut them off, then they won't be very welcoming, obviously, right? Because you're messing up their space, you're in their territory. So getting again through all of the questions. Again, I'll fill out the ones that we already know to give us a better picture. So 18, 19, I think 21 we said was B, 22 as you said was A, and then 24 we said was A as well. So it just leaves 20, 23, and 25. Suggests that newcomers are not always welcomed by veterans. Yeah, that's right, right? We're talking about the surfers who were not always welcoming of new surfers. The only time which they actually get angry, right? So the times where they are unwelcoming is when you cut them off, right? So this extract does talk about that. So 20 is C, reveals that the writer was out of place in a seaside environment. Now, the writer wasn't exactly out of place. Of course, they're still trying, they haven't really put themselves into that environment in the first place, right? They haven't really gone out into the water and started surfing. They're just still trying to learn the technical terms and learn, how to surf. But the other thing is it says seaside environment, right? So seaside means, next to the beach, right? It doesn't mean in the water itself, which is another clue that implies that this is not C, this is not the one we're looking for. And then 25 mentions specific jargon. So what do we say jargon was? It's technical terms, terminology, or special words that are used by very specific people, right? So just for people within a particular area, right? So it's a specific technical word. The answer to 25 is definitely C. And I don't even have to read my last one to know that the correct answer for this 23 must be D, right? So you save time by not even having to read the entire paragraph. That's a good amount of time that you've saved. That way, if there's any questions you're unsure of, you can go back and check your work and make sure that you get as close to full marks as you guys can. If you do want a little bit of further clarification, though, we can just quickly scan through that last one and find out why it's talking about the writer being out of place in a seaside environment. So looking down to extract D, it's basically talking about this Irish descended family, right? Who every time they go to the beach, they basically get sunburned. They get furiously sunburned. He hopes to never experience a full Aussie summer again, right? He didn't actually enjoy going to the beach. He doesn't enjoy these seaside holidays, right? So that's why this one relates best to that question. The writer was out of place, right? He didn't fit in. Well, that concludes this particular test, right? So that was all of the 25 questions. I hope that helps in terms of course, understanding why the answers are correct, but also, understanding how to get there and giving you some of the strategies that, we try and teach over here. Yeah, just keep practicing those skills, and all the best to our year 4 students.